All right, y'all, I'm so excited because I get to sit down with a good friend and author of her new book, Rebekah Lyons. Rebekah, thanks for being here.
Oh, absolutely.
So we were just talking even before we started recording, the timing of this book is crazy. So this came out in October of last year. You could have never possibly known what this year held for all of us. But just take us back and tell us, why did you want to write specifically about this idea of stress and anxiety before you even knew what was coming this year?
Absolutely. Well, my story with stress and anxiety began about a decade ago. My husband and I moved our 3 kids from the suburbs of Atlanta to Midtown Manhattan. Like, we were right in the heart of like the Upper East Side. And about 4 months into my time there, I had my first panic attack on a flight. Then it continued on subways and elevators. And
did you know what that was at the time? If you'd never had a panic attack?
No. All I knew is something just kind of rose in me right as we were hitting turbulence. We were landing in LaGuardia around midnight. And everyone's doubling down with their seatbelt. But I had more of, my anxiety was rooted in claustrophobia, this feeling of being trapped metaphorically. And so I was not at all worried about the turbulence. I was just like, when this thing lands, I'm going to be the last one off this plane. And so I just started literally St. Elmo's fire running towards the galley. And the sweet flight attendant's like, what are you doing? You know, and I just was like panic. And I kind of collapsed there in the galley. And what began that night lasted for about 20 months. And we had just moved to New York City. But I think what it was for us is like the pressure cooker, that all the things maybe I had coping mechanisms for, maybe for the decade prior to that of motherhood, because my firstborn son, I found out at 26, a few hours later, he had a diagnosis of Down syndrome, and then 2 more kids subsequently and within a couple years. So I just was kind of always in this
on edge?
Just because we had to rush him to the ER when he was little. He had croup and respiratory issues. And I guess I was just living in this space of stress. And then we get to New York, and then it just amped everything. And then all of a sudden, you've got 8 million people in the span of 11 miles. There is no such thing as personal space, right? You're just, that metaphor of being trapped became literal.
Real life.
And so that really was my journey, how it began. I never thought I would write. I never thought I would start to teach on it. He definitely used that season for my faith to just become like my source. And about a year and a half in, I just remember waking up in panic in the middle of the night and just wanting it to be done, but not having a sense of what that would look like. And I just remember praying one night, and I just like, rescue me, deliver me. I can't do this without you. And in that moment, my body just broke. Right out of the panic. I would say now I was just flooded with peace, like a peace that I didn't, when Jesus says, the peace I give, the world cannot give, I'm like, okay, I'll take some of that. I'll take that actual peace. And that just began a healing journey. And so I knew that I needed rhythms in my life. It's been a decade now for sustained emotional health, because we can have muscle memory of anxiety and panic. And if we put ourselves right in a trapped space, or even when I get on an elevator, if there's too many people on it, I'm like, I think I'll wait. I'll just take the stairs. You know, partly it's just knowing if that low hum is so elevated, we've got to know the rhythms that keep things intact for us, keep us, our head above water, knowing like, are we too spent? Are we depleted in strength or sleep or all those things? So I wrote it not at all knowing obviously what 2020 would bring. But one thing that's interesting is that we all came into COVID with the stats saying that 4 out of 5 of us had physical symptoms of stress. So it wasn't just me. It was like 87% of the American Institute of Stress said that normal, just all of us, living the lives that we chose, look like sleepless nights, anxious like thoughts, shallow breathing, a mind that won't quit. And so I was kind of like, I feel like COVID indirectly, like this has been the blessing of it, has been like just an immediate hard stop to that pace on some level to at least evaluate. So a year ago, I was trying to convince people like, you need rhythms. And now everyone's like, we couldn't have done this year without rhythms. So.
It's so interesting. I want to dig into the 4 rhythms in here. Before we do, I want to talk about just what you were describing, like the tight chest and the shallow breathing. I think, and I've done this for sure before, Rebekah, but I think some women just live with that. And they don't question it. They don't consider that there's a better way, there's a different way. There is a peace that, you truly can't understand in this world. And so I would love to hear from you, like for someone that's watching right now and they're like, isn't that just normal? Like, isn't that just like the racing thoughts, the sleepless nights? Like, I've lived like that so long. I didn't know there is another way. Kind of speak to that for a second, and then I want to dig into the rhythms in your book.
Like your reality is what you wake up to every morning. And if you've woken up to that as a norm for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, maybe whenever that intensity began, you don't even see how much it's actually taking from you until one day you wake up and you're like, I no longer recognize the person in the mirror. I don't know where she went. She seemed to be used to be fun.
Right.
Maybe carefree, maybe just happy and like joyful. It feels so far reaching. And we don't really incrementally take inventory as we get to that point. But when we hit to this place where we see the disruption there, maybe our kids recognize it or our husbands recognize it or our friends or even vocationally, bosses or peers, that's when we go, okay, I have to come to grips with I've lost a sense of who I was and I want to find her. I want to get her back.
Yeah.
And so we'll go through a lot of means to figure that piece out.
Yeah. You make a really good point that it happens so gradually that we don't notice. It's not a flip a switch. I mean, we would notice that. You know, we would notice even the extreme example on the airplane. Like, it's like that was such a drastic environment that like, oh, this is not normal. This is not okay. Yeah. But I think just the day-to-day, anxiety we experience. You talked about just the stats even before this year. We did some research on my listeners of the Christy Wright Show, the Business Boutique podcast. And I think it was something around 80% experience anxiety and stress. And I was like, wow, this is something we live with all the time. It's so common. And I think that there's obviously a place for medicine, counseling, all those things. But what I love about your book is you give really practical, approachable, relatable, accessible strategies and habits, rhythms, as you describe it in your book, that can help us combat that and take control. So will you walk us through those? You've got 4, but let's break down all of them. I want to go through them.
Well, things escalated for us, with the technological revolution, right? Up to 100 years ago, we actually followed the circadian rhythm. Then all of a sudden we had electricity, we had manufacturing, and the phrase always on was for factories because it actually cost more to turn those machines off and then power them back up in the morning. So that phrase always on was not meant for humans.
Not meant for us.
It was meant to, it was more efficient, right, to keep things running. And I think somehow along the way we took that for ourselves, we can get a lot more done in 2 more hours of work a day, and we can work into the middle of the night. And God's like, actually, did you know that a sunrise emits blue light, which tells you to wake up, and a sunset emits red light, which is natural melatonin for your body?
Wow. No,
so meanwhile, all we have to do is sit on our porch and, watch the sunset or go for a walk, which is one of my rhythms. But instead, we're staring at our phone until 11 or 12 o'clock at night that's constantly saying, wake up, wake up, wake up. And then all these images that you're comparing yourself to saying, here's how you didn't do enough today, right? So I think that's where we have to just stop. And so I start the book with a real practical practice of taking inventory of your life. Okay. What's right, what's wrong, what's confused, and what's missing. Okay. Just take the time. We all had some time in March.
Yes, to think about these things.
To just answer that question. Normally, we're going so fast and so hard for so long, we don't even know what we're missing. Unless we don't recognize ourselves, and then we get depressed about that, but we don't proactively know what to do next. So I take people through that practice. What is missing in your life? Is there laughter that's missing, right? Maybe patience, all the check, right? And then the second chapter is tech detox. Partly you've got to quiet that outside input just long enough to hear your own thoughts, to have an ongoing dialogue with God. Help show me where I've kind of veered off course. And 43% in a study a month ago said their lives are better than they were entering COVID.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. So the idea here is that we were not thriving coming into COVID, and we don't want to return to life the way we left it.
Right.
So the practical ways: rest, restore, connect, create. So rest and restore are the input rhythms. Connect and create are output rhythms. Most of us live in the output rhythms, but we get no input, which is why we're burnt out.
Yeah.
So rest is, all your practical things, like what does it look like for Sabbath? What does it look like for a morning routine? routines for deep sleep is a chapter a lot of people love. How do you quiet the noise at the end of the day so the mind stops racing? And then the restore rhythm is all about physical health. If you've rested and your inner life is okay, that spiritual life, then physically, what are you doing? Food for fuel, like how are you moving your body? How is serotonin being released naturally when you elevate your heart rate for 15 to 20 minutes a day? Yeah. That's your happy hormone that gives you positivity, well-being. It gives you momentum, which is what we need. We have to move our body. And we know all these things and we think they're kind of extra,
right?
But they actually sustain emotional and mental health.
Wow.
They really do. And that was the goal, is like, we don't want to just thrive in a season because we're killing it. We want a long-term, we want an endurance, right? We want to finish the race. We don't want to burn out in our 40s and be like, I'm out.
Right.
Like, I want to continue to find sustaining power in this. And then the last two, connect and create. Connect is all about relational health and just really practical things in there, like hospitality, leading with vulnerability, a whole chapter on friendship, because we're in the middle of a loneliness epidemic, right?
Yeah.
42% say that they have high feelings of loneliness. 26% say they don't have a real friend.
Wow.
So partly it's like, how do we actually get in touch with our feelings enough in the rest rhythm, and then be brave enough to actually voice those to someone in a real relationship in the connect rhythm.
Yeah.
So they all work together. And then the last rhythm, I know I'm like talking.
No, this is so great. No, I'm like hanging on every word. I'm like, go on. I need all of this. Go on.
Giving you the whole rundown. Then the last one is create. And the way I do rest, restore, connect, create is they build on each other. Yeah. Once you're rested and your inner life is good, then you have more like positivity to take care of your body, right? To give it what it needs. Then you have something to offer somebody else, right? And then when you work, you always work best in collaboration. It's hard to work well when you're not in good relationships with people.
Right.
So you're working on that connect rhythm, and then create, to me, is the most joyful place, because they all work together, but we always want the end.
Yeah.
And you realize it's like a building block, that your best work is doing what you love with the people that you love. And you're doing it because you're replenished. You know when to say, like, quit for the day, right? You know when to let the day be the day. Yeah. And so create is all about recovering your passion, working with your hands, saying yes to risk, which all sounds, this is your culture. This is what Ramsey Solutions does. And I love that. But it's about, like, what is the foundation required for us to thrive in that place? Yeah. And I'm an output rhythms girl, right? Yeah. Like I'm don't want to miss a party.
Yeah.
But I also found over time with like travel and teaching and being on a plane, like most Fridays from September to May for the last 7 years, that 3 days before COVID began, I wrote, I feel trapped in a life that's overwhelming. Mm. Because I had said yes and yes and yes and yes to all these wonderful opportunities. But I know in some ways this is an invitation even to take those input rhythms more seriously.
I did a Instagram live back at the beginning of COVID, and I was just doing this like Hope in the Chaos series on Instagram. It was like super casual, just like having conversations. And I was talking to Crystal Evans-Hurst, and she said, we are on a forced elimination diet. We are about to see what was making us sick. And I was like, isn't that interesting?
Because brilliant.
She is. I think we were all feeling exactly what you wrote down. I feel trapped in this life that's overwhelming, a life that we either allowed or created or some combination of both. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, everything was canceled. And it's like you're suddenly aware with what was making you sick, what was making you tired, what was,
Right.
And I love this idea of, even though there's so many downsides that we don't love about this and we want normal human connection again, there's something really beautiful about this blank slate where we can rethink how we live our life, and we don't have to rush back to that old life of being overwhelmed and being anxious. You can put some of these practices in place. Now, I want to start with the one that's hardest for me, Rebekah, and I want to go back to the beginning, which is rest, the input.
Yeah, girl.
Because I think a lot of busy women, busy moms, we are in a season, regardless of whether you have kids or not, work inside or outside the home, doesn't matter. We just are so productivity driven.
Yep.
We're so to-do list driven. And it's like, if I can just get through this day, get through this week, get through this season, and that leads to another day, another week, another season.
Sure,
and we're still
ends.
running hard. And so what does it look like to rest when nothing in your world is restful? Like Rebekah, you have 4 kids. I have 3, but I feel like I have 47 kids sometimes.
They spawn themselves during COVID.
I'm so tired all the time, and they're so hands-on right now. Yeah. Every car seat, every bath, every sippy cup, every diaper.
Yes.
What does it look like to rest and have that input, which is so needed, but also like realistic for someone that is truly in a season where it's like, okay, I don't just have tons of time for myself. So what does that look like for someone that like they find it hard to rest?
Yeah.
Because the work is never done. The house is never clean.
Never done. I have a 19-year-old with Down syndrome, and we've adopted a little girl who's now 7 with Down syndrome. And Gabe and I look like empty nesting. What is that? We're not going to have that.
You're in it.
I very much understand the work will never be done.
Yes.
But what I've had to go back to is like what, and sometimes we have to really dig deep. Like, what are the things that actually replenish me and like almost make me laugh out loud, kind of remind me of who I was in college. Yeah. So my husband and I got away for a couple days last week for the first time in 2 years without kids.
Wow.
And I know it was a blessing, and I know that's not happening for everybody right now, but it was enough to like get covered in mud on an ATV and just go down a river and just be reminded that I can laugh hysterically and be like, and
there I am, I'm in there.
She's in there somewhere. But that doesn't have to mean travel. It could mean like a day trip, or could mean a couple hours away. Like take Sabbath seriously. And usually the thing that replenishes you looks like the opposite of work. So if you're in your head a lot and you work a lot like with content and all that, then you need to do something tactile and active, right? You know, maybe if you're in the circus, then you might rest for you. Sorry.
We have a lot of circus listeners, Rebekah. Go on with the circus example.
I couldn't think of something faster. But if you're more active in your vocation, then maybe like reading a book or going for a walk or whatever, like do something that's a little more different. Find out what it is. But I would say for every day, for me, it's still replenishing for me to get outside. So if I can just get outside in the morning or the evening and take a walk, with Gabe or with one of the kids if they want, or by myself or with a girlfriend, whatever, I don't care. Somebody's going to walk with me. Just find that thing. Find that thing. If it's like, if you're an extrovert and you like loud volume, no matter how old you are, I am not that person. Just put the windows down, blare the music, get your favorite song, you know, whatever it is that just makes you laugh and brings some joy there and takes the responsibility off your plate for a moment. I mean, we wear responsibility like a badge, and it's a good thing. Like strategy is my number one strength, responsibility is my second. But let's be honest. If those are the only 2 hats that I wear, I am not that much fun to be around over time.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? And so it's like, okay, that's my hat primarily when I'm in kind of the output mode. Right. But that's not replenishing me to like continue to do that well.
Right.
Let's find the
or even
opposite.
enjoy yourself while you're doing it.
Yeah. All of a sudden, people are like, you're really not that fun to be around when you get in that like laser. And I was like, you know what? That's because I actually haven't balanced it with play. Yeah. And so there's a chapter in there at the beginning of the Restore Rhythm called Permission to Play. And the idea I learned in that, which we mamas all have to be preaching to ourselves, or women in general, I think, is that play and control cannot coexist. So when you're home and you're responsible for the, you know, well-being of your kids, and, you know, it's really hard to have a freedom with play. But if you just go, okay, we're just going to let it be what it is, you know, like it's going to
see what happens.
Yeah. And we're going to dance around, or we're going to make a mess, and we're going to just be okay with it, you know? And maybe that needs to be outside. Maybe that needs to be on vacation somewhere. But find a place in your life where you don't have to carry the responsibility fully, or you can at least offset that with somebody else helping you do that.
I love that idea, and I love that you talked about that. Like laughter and play, I think we are so output-driven, we're so responsibility-driven, productivity-driven, that it's like, oh, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for play. Just a couple weekends ago, my husband asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and I was like, I want just some of our friends, like couple friends, to go to the lake and just play. I was like, I want to be a kid. I was like, I'm a grown-up taking care of kids all the time. I was like, I want to be the kid. And so we went down there and we went tubing. Like I have scars all over my arms.
Same. I got one from
It was
tubing.
so fun though. I laughed until I could not breathe. Like I couldn't even catch my breath. We were laughing so hard.
Doesn't it surprise you when that kind of laughter comes out of your body? You're like,
and you
it's
really,
so fun.
It's so fun. That's the thing. I think it's like we so underestimate fun. Like it's like this optional thing. It's like your life should be fun. I was speaking a few weeks ago at our Entree Leadership event, and I said this line, and you know how sometimes I know you speak a lot, like you'll say a line and like you hear in the audience go, oh. And I said, because these are like hard driving business owners, like bottom line driven, ROI, everything. And I said, I was talking about fun. And I said, because I promise you this, if you don't make time for fun, you're not any fun to be around. And they were like, oh, like it's like suddenly there was like a reason for it. But I thought, that's true for me, that's true for you, that's true for all of us, that if we don't make time for fun, whether it's fun with our kids in messy play, or fun on our own on an ATV or on a tube, then we're not any fun to be around. And life is too short to just be all about the bottom line, the to-do list. It's like we're not going to have any fun living this life. Okay, Rebekah, I could talk to you about this all day. This is so good. And what I love about it is, we were talking about this even before we recorded, it's so approachable, because I think this idea of rest or balance or any of these buzzwords we all talk about all the time feels like a moving target.
Yeah.
It's so we can't define it, we can't seem to achieve it, and you just make it so accessible. It's like, oh yeah, rest, restore. These are things I can do right now today. I know people will want to know where they can find your book and how they can learn more, and you've got some exciting stuff coming up. So tell us about how they can connect with you.
Oh, absolutely. RebekahLyons.com, and that's spelled REBEKAH.
Yes.
LYONS.com. But and the book is anywhere books are sold. And one thing that's great is there's some questions at the back of each chapter. So you can even start to take that inventory of your life. And I do think COVID allowed a lot of us to take inventory of our life, and is still doing that. Like, how do we reframe that? Since we got a clean slate on some level, we got to kind of gently get out of the things that we had committed to a long time ago. And we were just
I didn't want to go to that anyway. Great, it's canceled. Perfect.
And we can almost rebuild and reestablish. And that's kind of the mantra of the book. It's never too late to reestablish what you want your life to be about. So to me, that's a promise that you get to take agency over. You actually get to decide. And I give you 7 examples of each rhythm, but those are just mine. You can make your own. And then I have a 90 days Rhythms for Life, 90 days to Peace and Purpose coming out the end of October. And it's really more how to implement those rhythms that you decide you want to do. And just know you're not alone, and there's a community doing it with you. So I think, we all need to challenge each other to get healthy because it's if it's for endurance, I think it's for our kids to see that like work doesn't like make you lose who you are. It actually enlivens that as long as you can find balance around that.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the message here too, that is just, we have control over this. You're not a victim in your life. You're not a victim to your schedule. Like, you have control over your rest, your restoration, how you connect, how you create. Like, there's a personal responsibility element in this that is convicting, but also empowering. Like, oh, I can change this. Like you said, I can change this. I can make a difference. I can do something different. Thank you so much, Rebekah. You are just such a light. You're so fun to hang out with. And this is one of those things I'm like, oh, so good. I need to do that today. So anyway, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.